When reading your Bible, where should you start? There are 66 books in the Bible, and sometimes there's this question of, well, where should I start reading? And people usually come through to two different conclusions. They pick random places to start, or they'll say, well, just like a book, I start from the beginning and I read to the end. Both of those options are okay, but I feel like you can choose a method that works best for you. So one of the first things I would suggest is, what verse of the Bible or book of the Bible really moved you when the pastor was speaking this Sunday or last Sunday, or maybe the Sunday you got saved? What was it that was really speaking to you? And if you remember that or you wrote that down, that might be the book of the Bible to start. If it's kind of an off book, something you'd never heard of or read, maybe you might want to look into who wrote the book and maybe do a Google search of history facts of the book. So that way you don't go into whatever it is blind. You know kind of the history that's leading up to this specific book that you're reading. If you don't remember where to start, I would suggest starting with the Gospels. First four books of the New Testament is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And each one has a specific way written about it. So if you're thinking about reading a gospel and you have a lot of history in the church, maybe you grew up in the church, you know a lot of those older stories, I would suggest reading Matthew. Matthew is grounded in the Old Testament. So as Matthew writes, he makes a lot of references to different stories in the Old Testament, who Jesus was, some prophecies, all from the Old Testament referring back into Matthew. Now, if you're more interested in, say, the church and how the church got started and what exactly it meant as the Christian movement to go forward, then maybe you might want to read the book of Luke. Luke's a great book, and he also wrote Acts. And so once when you read this gospel and you learn all about Jesus and you read the Gospel of Luke, you can immediately go into Acts. And that's all about how the church got started. And so those two books, even though they're separated in the Bible, you can really look at them as just one big book, the first half and the second half. The first half is Jesus and getting everything started, and the second half is about the church and how Jesus worked through the church. My favorite book is John. John is an amazing gospel all about love, and it's written like a narrative. If I'm going to sit down and read a gospel, I really like to read John because it's written like any other novel would be written. It has neat twists and turns, and it's written in such a language that it's easy to read. So I really like to start with John. But really, any of the first four gospels is where I would suggest starting. Now, with that said, another place that you could possibly start is Romans. So that's all about salvation. A man named Paul wrote Romans, and he really dove into what it means to be saved, how we have that assurance in being saved, what the world looks like without Christ. And we find this great, awesome picture that Paul paints of who Jesus is to the Christian. So Romans is a great option as well. If you start from the beginning, if you do start with Genesis, just know that you're going to run into some difficult chapters in Exodus and Deuteronomy. It's all about how God set up Israel as a nation. So think of it like reading a little bit of history of America and then just reading the Constitution. It's kind of that same principle, the history of Israel, but then the Constitution, the law of Israel. And sometimes that can be a little bit difficult, especially if you have other books that might be a little bit more compelling to start with. So if you start with 4 books, fantastic. If you do want to read from the beginning to the end, I encourage you to really grit your teeth on some parts and just know that you're going to run into some legalese. And if you're looking for just anything else, Romans is another great place to start. So again, there's no specific place in the Bible where I says, you need to go here and read this. With that said, there are different reasons on why you can make a choice to read some books first.